was here was actually a fighter pilot. He had a fighter pilot jacket on, but now he's got a baseball jacket on. So he understands something that the Liberals perhaps do not. So here, for 3 terms, they provided weak and out-of-touch leadership. 3 terms. They drove up costs and crime. 3 terms. They sent our jobs south and pushed our economy under the American thumb. My little boy understands something the Liberals do not, which is that in baseball and in politics, it's 3 strikes and you're out.
3 strikes and you're out. They want 4 strikes. Mark Carney is masquerading as a small c conservative in this election. And as we'll remind you today, everything in his past suggests he's not in favor of Canada. He's not in favor of free enterprise. He has a leftist past. When we come back, more about Mark Carney and why he's going to be another Sun King, just like Justin Trudeau. We need political change, but we also need to resolve to resist. If please like the station right now, it's important to beat the YouTube censorship, suppression, and please become a member. Subscribe. And resubscribe if you have to. Sometimes that happens. I have to remind you that because we're headed for 50,000. Let's get there within the next couple of weeks. And I appreciate your support all the time, every day, to keep this station moving. And it's much appreciated. So this is a battle, this election. Just called yesterday. 35 days of decision. We have 35 days to ensure that Mark Carney does not fool every Canadian voter, or even enough of those voters to win. This election is a battle between the Conservatives in Canada First and the Liberals under Canada Strong. Sounds appealing, doesn't it? Both of these slogans have resonance, and they both sound appealing. But you can only bet on the Conservatives in this two-way race, standing up for Canada. Now, why do I say that? Why do I think the Liberals don't believe in Canada Strong, or free, for that matter, or first? Because the last 10 years have shown just how little regard the Liberals have for the Canadian economy, for Canadian democracy, for Canadian free speech. They have tried to suppress our free speech. And thank God, by the way, Bill C-63 is dead and hopefully will never be reintroduced. The most onerous, ominous piece of censorship legislation died yesterday, officially, when this election was called. Died on the order paper because there was a chance it could have been resurrected had this Liberal government continued. If you look at Mark Carney, he hasn't even been in Canada, strong or free, for the last decade. He's been devoting his life to the United Nations, to internationalist causes, to globalism. All he's come back to Canada for was to advise the Trudeau government on economic policies. Carney does not promote, defend, or embody anything that's Canadian. He is emblematic, though, of globalism and its dark soul. He sold his soul years ago to the backroom elites who seek to grind your freedom, not under jackboots anymore. No, that's too passé, but under their Gucci shoes. Well, you go barefoot. That's my message for today. And I say again, we have got to be very wary of Mark Carney, because this is Mark Carney. Have a look at our Substack deep dive on this, because we've talked about his Marxist convictions, his Marxist beliefs. He admires Vladimir Lenin, a bloodthirsty communist tyrant. He's an acolyte for Karl Marx, the progenitor of hundreds of millions of deaths with a philosophy that didn't believe in the individual but the state. So Mark Carney today, he's pretending, he's masquerading as this, yes, let's say it, small c conservative. And in his election announcement yesterday, so many people commented, he's trying to sound like Pierre Poilievre. He didn't quite make it. He even suggested that he's prime minister because it was preordained. What, by God, for him to be prime minister. He's coming to save the nation. You know, that sounds like a certain German leader in the 1930s who used to talk like that. Very, very disturbing. But you know what really, really bothers me about this whole thing? Is the way he sidelined a Liberal MP from Nepean, Chandra Arya. And you know, it's now that Chandra has decided to run as an independent, and there's a strong conservative candidate in that riding, there's a very good possibility that Mark Carney could lose. Because it's not a two-way race, though. It's a three-way race with a former MP, 10 years in that riding. Now, it's rare for independents to win. That's why there's so few of them in the House of Commons. But it's also rare for a 10-year veteran of the House of Commons to be turfed by the party leader when he's won in the last 3 elections. They're going to get rid of the guy because it's just convenient. And I think it shows that the absolute hatred the Trudeau and now the Carney government has for Indo-Canadians. Because Ruby Dalla, yeah, she was turfed as well from the leadership race because apparently she had too much support. It was worrying Mark Carney. But I let's listen to what George Soros had to say here, because it all comes down to what you want to believe about George Soros. And here's George Soros.
But the system we have now has actually broken down, only we haven't quite recognized it. And so you need to create a new one. And this is the time to do it.
In the United States, how worried are you about the budget deficit and maybe about the possibility of inflation?
Well, certainly a decline in the value of the dollar is necessary in order to compensate for the fact that the U.S. economy will remain rather weak, will be a drag on the global economy. China will emerge as the motor replacing the U.S. consumer. And of course, it's a smaller motor because the Chinese economy is much smaller. So the world economy will have less of a motor. So it will move forward slower than it has in the last 25 years. But China will be the engine driving it forward, and the U.S. will be actually a drag that's being pulled along through a gradual decline in the value of the dollar. So there would be a slow decline in the value of the dollar, a managed decline. And that would be the adjustment that it needs to be accomplished.
You're not mistaken if you recognized Chrystia Freeland, her former finance minister, current transport minister. Yes, and shortly after that interview, she was informed that she was going to become the ruler of Canada's economy. I wonder if it had something to do with that very sympathetic interview with George Soros, who, of course, now you say, well, George Soros can say whatever he wants. Yeah, and he can pay a lot of money to get the people he wants elected. Will there be any Soros money in this election, the way George Soros has paid to have DAs elected across the United States, from San Francisco to New York City? I wonder. But here's Mark Carney talking about the same thing you just heard George Soros say. It is good that the Chinese currency has become the global reserve currency. He said that at the China Development Forum just last year. Previously, he had said, now that the United States' economy is doing better than most, pushing the dollar higher, smaller countries are suffering more than they should. Trump's tariffs on imports from China and elsewhere are adding to the dollar's strength as well, making matters even worse. And the most likely candidate for true reserve currency status, the Chinese yuan, or as he says, the renminbi, which is the digital version of it, has a long way to go before it is ready to assume the mantle. The initial building blocks are there. Already, China is the world's leading trading nation, overtaking the U.S. at the start of this decade. So Mark Carney wants the Chinese yuan to replace the American dollar. Now, you hear Mark Carney all the time talking about he's the guy who can get tough with Donald Trump. He's the guy who can negotiate because he's had that global experience. He knows world leaders as the governor of the Bank of Canada, as the governor of the Bank of England. So why isn't he fighting Donald Trump now? Why did he run off to Europe? Why did he run off to Europe when he's supposedly gearing up for this trade war with Donald Trump? He's going to fight for Canada. Canada's strong. Where does he go? He goes to Europe and even talks about the idea of Canada joining the European Union. So what's really happening? Canada has been informed it can't become a real member of the European Union, but possibly it can enter into a military-industrial agreement with wackos like Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron in the European Union, talking about going to war with Russia. Is that the kind of relationship you want? Is that you really want an agreement like that? Mark Carney does because he's a globalist. Mark Carney does because he doesn't believe in Canada. And we got to show you this. This George Soros, Mr. Hypocrite.
Trump is a con man and the ultimate narcissist who wants the world to revolve around him. When his fantasy of becoming president came true, his narcissism developed a pathological dimension.
So this is a guy who tries to control elections around the world, who tries to control economy, who artificially controlled the value of the British pound so he could make millions of dollars. As I say, he backs up left-wing leaders, left-wing causes. But it's all about power for George Soros. As I've said repeatedly over the last couple of weeks, ideology for these people is simply a veneer. It's power that matters. That's all politics is about for them. Control. They want to control you. They want to control what you think and how you view things. And it's quite frightening. One more clip of Mark Carney. I intentionally did not put a lot of Mark Carney in. We saw that yesterday when he made the big announcement, when he did his Pierre Poilievre act, when he talked about, almost said, sunny ways. Oh, we just need to get together, be a unified country. under the WEF, Mark? Is that how you're going to seek unity for this country? But I love the question here. And it's interesting how Mark Carney is horrible on his feet. He's a horrible speech maker. He's a horrible speaker. He is very uncomfortable with being challenged. But this is interesting.
Why did you choose to run in the riding of Nepean, and what was involved in your decision in terms of also the fact that Mr. Chandra Arya, who has represented this riding for quite some time as a Liberal, what is the situation involving him being disqualified from running in this race? And do you live in this riding?
So several things there in your question. First, the decision of candidates selection or candidate approval, we have within the Liberal Party a committee called the Greenlight Committee, which takes into account various information about candidates, does basic candidate due diligence, if I can put it that way. Mr. Arya, so I'm not a member of that committee. And they take their decisions. Mr. Arya, as you know, was disqualified from the leadership race for the Liberal Party because of certain factors. That informed the decision, is my understanding, of the Greenlight Committee to recommend that he be disqualified as a candidate in Nepean. Now, from my perspective,
Just pause for a minute. So this clown is claiming he had nothing to do with this. Nothing to do with it at all. It just happened that way. He had nothing to do with making sure Arya was removed from the leadership race. And he still can't explain why. Certain factors, he can't explain why. And he had nothing to do with removing the guy as a MP candidate, disqualifying him in his nomination. Mark Carney will lie to your face. Mark Carney is toxic.
I've been a resident in the Ottawa area for almost 20 years, with the exception, of course, when I was quite obviously a resident in London, when I was governor of the Bank of England. But apart from the time when I was governor there, I've been a resident in Ottawa. I know Nepean well.
So now he's a resident of Ottawa for 20 years. I'd like to see that verified. And this is Mr. Globalist, mind you. Now he's claiming 20 years in Ottawa. Remember when it was, I'm from the Northwest Territories. I'm just an Edmonton boy. I grew up in Edmonton. So now he's adopted Ottawa as his hometown.
I was best man to Peter Chiarelli, grew up in Nepean. So from Barrhaven to Bell's Corners and in between, it's an area I know well. And in many respects, it's representative of many of the aspects, not all the aspects, but many of the aspects of this country. Median incomes around probably $50,000, $55,000, so a little less than the national average, but in there. Very diverse. Both the opportunities and the challenges that we face as a country, and those are challenges that I'm looking to address. That's why I put my hand up. That's why I'm here as Prime Minister. That's what I'm eager to move forward with my Liberal colleagues on. And this is the positive vision that we're putting forward for the people of Nepean, the people of Ottawa, the people of Ontario, the people of Canada. Thank you very much.
That's a horrible answer. And it's an utter lie to suggest he had nothing to do with this. Of course he did. Of course he did. He was the person who was supposed to win this leadership. And by the way, that he won that leadership through electronic voting. And I'm trying to find out today whether or not Elections Canada has gone to electronic voting, run by a company that I'd rather not mention because they love to sue at the very mention of their name. But they've had lots of problems in the past with voting. They ran the last two Ontario provincial elections, or or they provided the machinery for the last two Ontario provincial elections. Will they provide the machinery for this federal election? That's a question we need to know. We really do need to know that. Here's another response from Carney, which I find
Sir,
fascinating.
why are you throwing the country into an election in the middle of a tariff war? And if you think it's so necessary now, then why not make it longer so Canadians can really test drive you to see if you represent the change you claim to represent?
Well, a couple of things, Tonda. First is that we have put in place a tremendous amount of change in the 9 days that I have been Prime Minister. That includes changes to taxes, including the announcement today of a middle-class tax cut. But very importantly, we put in place protections for workers. So we made a commitment right from the start that we would use all revenues from retaliatory tariffs to protect our workers. And we put in place changes to the EI system in order to do that. I note that Mr. Poilievre has taken that money and said he will use it for a tax cut. Doesn't care about workers being in place. We've put in place protections for businesses through this period. We have shown the scale of our.
Okay, do you hear what he's saying? We have to unpack this because it sounds, oh, good. He's thinking of workers. No, he's thinking about another stipend during a crisis period. Another reset, perhaps? This is how the Liberals used COVID. Don't worry, stay at home, fall to pieces, but you'll get your little stipend in the mail. No, you can't go to work, but that doesn't matter. You'll get your check in the mail. You'll get your government bonus. And that's how they control us. And that's how they use crises for their own benefit. So they look like they're the great government. And you are the benefactor of their generosity. Never mentioning that it's just taxpayers' dollars being recycled and it's more money, the national debt, more money in the annual deficit. But this is how Mark Carney thinks. Oh, he's such a smart man. He's a banker, PhD. But he doesn't seem to think we don't have the resources anymore to go through another period of crisis with the government handing out cash to millions of Canadians. We're already on the verge of complete collapse. And by the way, so is Great Britain, thanks to his mismanagement as the governor of the Bank of England. But this is what they're up to.
In terms of creating what Canadians have asked for, and I've heard this time and time again across this great country. Canadians want one Canadian economy, not 13. They want us to break down those barriers. So we brought together the first ministers, the premiers of the provinces. We hammered out a consensus about achieving that. We're picking up on the models that Nova Scotia and others have put in place. We're making a commitment at the federal level to legislate the removal of all these barriers by Canada Day, so we can have free trade by Canada Day. So we've done a lot, I could go on, but we've done a lot in the 9 days to put in place many of the foundations. But what's important is that the government has a mandate from the Canadian people.
Yeah. So what does he mean by one Canadian economy? Well, ostensibly, he's talking about reducing trade barriers between provinces, but he's also talking about eliminating the constitutional right of provinces to control their natural resources. So Alberta can't sell oil and gas without the federal government saying so. Is this war on the province? Is this war on the Constitution? He said he'll use emergency powers to get his way, to advance his agenda. Will he use the Emergencies Act to overwhelm the Canadian Constitution and provincial autonomy over natural resources? I think it's highly possible. This is a devious, mendacious man who will do anything and say anything in the pursuit of power. And of course, right now, the Liberals are demonizing Alberta Premier Daniel Smith. Smith urged the U.S. to interfere in Canadian election. Oh, that's a no-no, isn't it? Interfere. What does that mean? Well, we have the interview. And I think it's very interesting. Let's hear exactly what she said.
The name of the Conservative Party leader, and he was miles ahead of Justin Trudeau. But because of the what we see as unjust and unfair tariffs, it's actually caused an increase in the support for the Liberals. And so that's what I fear, is that the longer this dispute goes on, politicians posture, and it seems to be benefiting the Liberals right now. So I would hope that we could put things on pause. This is what I've told administration officials. Let's just put things on pause so we can get through an election. Let's have the best person at the table make the argument for how they would deal with it. And I think that's Pierre Poilievre. And I do agree with you that if we do have Pierre as our prime minister, then I think that there's a number of things that we could do together. Pierre believes in development. He believes in low-cost energy. He believes that we need to have low taxes. Doesn't believe in any of the woke stuff that we've seen taking over our politics for the last 5 years. So I would think that there's probably still always going to be areas that are skirmishes or disputes about particular industries when it comes to the border. But I would say, on balance, the perspective that Pierre would bring would be very much in sync with, I think, where the new direction in America.
Ooh. So she's only identifying what I've been saying for 3 months, that the Liberals are running against Donald Trump. And the more antagonistic Donald Trump appears to be to Canadians, the more it benefits the Liberal Party to win the next election. She's identifying a fact and saying it would be nice to put a pause on the war of words, on the threats of tariff, so we can get this election over without Donald Trump becoming a friend and ally of the Liberal Party and Mark Carney, because that's exactly what he has been, perhaps unintentionally. But the Liberals have exploited this trade war from day one. They want this trade war. That's why Mark Carney's not doing anything about the trade war right now. He's going to Europe. He's fighting an election now. Now he won't have time to go see Donald Trump because he doesn't want the trade war to end, at least not now. He'll think about it after the election, but he wants that mandate. He wants to win that federal election, and he knows he can do that, potentially do that, if he can use the trade war to his advantage and demonize Donald Trump, play this game, this cynical game. That's exactly what he's doing. Now, how did Pierre Poilievre do on day one? Arguably pretty good. Let's have a look.
In order to try and get a fourth term, after driving up costs and crime, after destroying our economy and putting us under the thumb of the Americans, the Liberals are replacing, you got to give them points for creativity and audacity. They are replacing Justin Trudeau with his economic advisor and hand-picked successor. First of all, they are the same Liberals with the same ministers, the same MPs, the same advisors, the same policies, and even today making the same promises that they've been breaking for over 10 years. And who did they choose to bring in? Mr. Carney. We are going to have under the Liberals led by Trudeau or Carney, what we have is out-of-touch, weak leadership. And for Mr. Carney, someone who will not stand up for our country. Only 6 days after Donald Trump threatened tariffs on our country, Mark Carney decided to move his headquarters out of Canada to the United States, to New York, Trump's hometown. That's the kind of... He moved billions of dollars out of the country. He is in massive multi-million-dollar, he admits, by the way, he's in massive multi-million-dollar conflicts of interest, but he just won't tell us what they are. He knows all of his investments. He knows all of his investments, but he won't tell you, even though those interests run against Canada's interests, my friends. It is time to stop putting the Liberal Party first. It is time to put Canada first for a change.
Yeah. Keep reminding Canadians of Mark Carney's hypocrisy. The fact that Mark Carney has made millions of dollars off fossil fuels, or his company has. That Mark Carney will do whatever he wants to do when it's benefiting Mark Carney. But you have to adhere to net zero. Businesses, corporations have to pay a carbon tax and adhere to net zero. And you want to tell me Mark Carney's a different man today? He's changed. It's a game. And he knows the only hope he has of winning this election after the 10 years of catastrophe under Justin Trudeau is to pretend he's just like Pierre Poilievre, except he's had more experience in the private sector and more experience dealing with world leaders. It's a terrible joke. One more brief clip from Pierre Poilievre here, which I thought his appearance in North York, and of course they're targeting Toronto area because that's going to be vital to winning this election. But this is interesting.
We will start by axing the carbon tax. By the way, the tax still applies at the pump today, but the Liberals are going to pull a fast one on this as well. After 7 years of applying the carbon tax, they've decided that they're going to hide it at the gas station for 30 days before the election, while keeping the carbon tax law in place. Furthermore, Mr. Carney says that he will bring in an industrial carbon tax. Another area, this is an area where Mr. Carney agrees with Donald Trump. They both want to tax Canadian industry. Trump's tariffs and Carney's carbon tax will send hundreds of thousands of Canadian jobs moving south of the border. There will be a large sucking sound of Canadian jobs leaving the country if the Carney carbon tax on steel, on fertilizer, on aluminum, on basically every industrial product that we rely on for our modern civilization.
It's an ode to Ross Perot. Giant sucking sound. Pierre said large sucking sound. When I come back, a few. Yeah, it's going to be a tough election. And by the way, please visit our store. We've got some great products. I think they're the best out there for YouTubers like myself, journalists like myself, offering them on air. But Pierre Poilievre has got a tough election ahead of him. This is going to be a difficult race. I think he's got more stamina and vigor than Mark Carney, who just turned 60. Pierre's a much younger man. I think he's got more energy to keep up with the demands of this campaign. But he's also got to remind Canadians every day about Mark Carney's hypocrisy, about Mark Carney's financial interests, about Mark Carney not believing in anything except Mark Carney and globalism. And it's all about power. Mark Carney believes in power. That's his ideology. And Pierre Poilievre's got to remind people of that every day. Thank you for watching today, folks. I'll be back again tomorrow with another episode of Stand on Guard, bringing you all the news you need to know.